Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
The Curse of the Undead is upon you.
All right, so diving in today, we're continuing our updates or our reviews on the 151 update from GW, the FAQ, going through all the different army. This time we're going to be diving into Tomb Kings. So Evan, let's look at the board and see what we believe are some of the biggest impacts we're seeing to the Tomb King meta going forward.
Okay, well, besides the fact that it's clipped out slightly, which I'm just now noticing, we can talk about the Chariots in units being just swatted like a fly, where it's like, no, because if you're in a unit of infantry and you're not the same unit type, oh boy, can you just be shot at by Vile Tide, cannonballs, etc. And obviously they were doing this because they found the Tomb King Death Star vibe to be very cringe and not wanting you to do that. Ironically, it hurts Tomb Kings the least because the Chariots still give you lots of wounds and you have like 3 saves, so you could probably
So,
just.
for people who are
Yeah.
not familiar with it, I know a lot of the people watching are familiar with the Chariot Tomb King Death Star that did exist in the past. GW has taken a pass in this FAQ to make sure that is no longer a viable thing because, let's face it, it was not fun and clearly wasn't really intended. But Evan, explain
Yeah.
to people generally what the concept was and why the updates now are making it no longer a viable thing.
So you could essentially just take all of your characters, like the Tomb King, the Tomb Prince, the Royal Herald, and stuff like that, and just stick them on the Tomb King Chariot, which gave you 3 extra wounds and allowed you to just join a unit, and the unit could
Because
be
it
at
was
any
a light
time.
chariot,
Yeah.
and so heavy chariots specifically have a rule that says they cannot join units, except unless there are other chariots that allow them to join each other. Light chariots, if you look at the rule book, have no such rule, and the Tomb Kings are chock full of light chariots. So everybody was putting all their characters on a bunch of light chariots and just jamming them into a big block of skeletons, and they were making a mega Death Star unit of everything all in one. And so, why was this such a powerful strategy, Evan?
So in particular, you could just cast all your enchantments on the same unit. There's so many wounds in a single place that it can't really be crumbled or combat resolution to death. It's never going to run away because it's undead. And you're
Mm-hmm.
not very vulnerable to shooting because you have the Lookout Sir against like cannonballs and stuff like that. So um, essentially, you just build this unkillable thing that can either shoot, for example, let's say this whole unit, right, has bows and they all have poison shots. And in the last FAQ, you could use every single rank of archers to fire against large targets, so all of your enemy dragons, or even if they're just like a Necrosphinx or a Mangler Squig and there happen to be a large target for some reason, they could just get hit by like 70 arrows. And this unit can just walk around being basically unable to be dealt with because who could ever fight that? Oh, and besides the fact that it also had fear, so units would have to take a leadership test to even charge you in the first place. And if you fail one of those and only 2 of your 3 units get into the brick, then I mean that's probably not the math you want, right? So essentially they didn't say that chariots can't join units, which I think they should have just said that. They really should have just said, hey, maybe a chariot can't join a unit. Cool, whatever, we can move on with our lives. But instead they said, no, if you're in a unit that's the wrong type, you can just be targeted as if you were separately. So you can just be shot at by magic missiles or cannonballs or whatever. There's no lookouts, or you just get to be targeted by spells and things like that. So that kind of makes it mean that you're not safe in that unit anymore by doing this play. And yeah, I think that in many matchups that'll be unplayably bad. So if you're trying to bring this play, especially people who are playing online will do this, then you can't just risk that half the time your opponent's dwarves and has 3 cannonballs and they can just shoot you with them, right? You can't risk that. So you're going to have to play a different way.
Yep. Okay. So now that they've made that, that was the update that GW chose, and there were other things as well. And remember, that unit was also had poison. It was teleporting around the battlefield, so it was the most problematic example of a Death Star we've seen in this edition to date. And of course, but it was also such a large brick that basically people were primarily only using it online because most players in person haven't assembled that many skeletons or built the models for that armor, but some have. But anyway, this is how GW clearly chose to address it. We haven't seen it since. That doesn't mean it's completely gone, but it certainly is no longer near the effectiveness that it was before. So I believe that all those players who are looking to get that slight edge on the meta or a more powerful Tomb Kings list are looking at other things now. So that's why we've seen that shift away from it. But chariots in units are not viable. So it's not to say chariots aren't viable, but are you saying all chariots in units, Evan, or walk us through your thought process?
So you can still be on a light chariot and join a unit of chariots, but you
Mm-hmm.
have the problem that you have to have 5 rank and file models, which means 5 literal chariots with you to be able to get lookout sir rolls. So if you have a Tomb King on a chariot and he joins a unit of 2 other chariots, he doesn't get Lookout Sir if he gets shot by literally anything. So you can't target him separately like you would in the infantry scenario, but you still can, for example, bounce a cannonball through him and he can't get a Lookout Sir roll. So I think that I think that Andrew sometimes plays with characters on chariots that are actually in units of actual chariots, which is interesting. And he said they're very okay. Me personally, I think that having T4 and a couple wounds on a Swift Stride model is fine. And they're only like 30 something points per chariot. It's more just how much physical board space these things take up as opposed to whether or not they're good for the points. I just don't know if you can use a unit of 10 chariots.
Yeah, and I think that's been, I agree, the biggest problem with them is that inherently the Chariot's base is a large chariot base. And so when you have, 2 or 3 of them, okay, it starts to get a little unwieldy, but now we're like the knight unit. But now if you start to have them in a rank deep, right, where you have them 4 wide, it really becomes difficult to maneuver them on a battlefield, especially if you have any terrain on the such, right? It's certainly our table to have a lot of terrain. Other communities do as well. Some communities have less. That being said, just wheeling the unit, right, because you're so wide of a frontage becomes really, really hard to do. So suddenly that fast, nimble moving around the board that you want to get out of it, you're just not getting it there. So it is interesting. I'm surprised, honestly. I thought that light chariots, honestly, should be treated like fast cavalry, in my opinion, in terms of making them a lot more maneuverable to move around the battlefield, in which case this would be a lot more viable, but they're not. Because they're moving in closed order or even open order, depending on the type of chariot, it does become hard to get them to the places you want to get them often. So having those big units of them looks amazing, but actually really hard to use on the battlefield.
It'd be really interesting if they did have the drilled rule, because even with their massive base, if you could just add or remove a couple of those guys from the front rank before moving, it'd be great, but they don't have that. I mean, they have reserve move, which is incredible as well, and with open order reserve move, you get to do lots of cool stuff, but yeah. I still think they're very good, and they're a very cheap core unit that can, for one thing, it can run towards a war machine crew and say, look, if you either have to shoot these chariots or they're going to get to you, and that might not be good for you, right?
Yeah, and they still pose a threat, and they're still very cost effective and very fast and nimble. But again, you're really looking at fielding them in units of 2 or 3, right? To not have too wide of a frontage. So it is interesting to see. I have yet to see, or we have yet to see, really a chariot meta. We've seen them as really supports, right? Whether it's Beastmen, whether it's Tomb Kings, or other armies or Chaos, they really are a support role. It's very hard to make a chariot dominated list, but we will still see them on the table. I think we're just not going to see characters embedded in units anymore.
Okay, the next one is, are we crumbling to combat resolution or are we regenning to victory? And it's been a lot of debate and hums and ahs about this, but in my games that I've seen, so in particular with Tomb Kings, they do not have the regen banner that gives them a 5-up regen like the Vampire Counts have. And because they don't have that, a lot of their units, if they're crumbling, only have a 6-up regen, which is not that big of a deal. And I think that a lot of the times it doesn't even matter. And on the off chance that you have a single unit of, like, let's say it's a light chariot, right? And it loses combat by like 3 or 4, and then it just rolls a single 6. It might still have exploded all the way anyway, right? It might still have crumbled too much. It might have needed multiple 6s to not lose the unit. And even if you don't lose the unit, your ability to heal them is only from 12 inches away, so they might not be in range. So I think that the whole double regen thing is in particular in the case of Tomb Kings, isn't that big of a deal. It's mostly, I think, actually just that one banner from Vampire Counts that causes people to lose their minds, especially because Graveguard and Tomb Guard are not the same thing. Tomb Guard have light armor, and Graveguard have heavy armor. Tomb Guard have halberds, which are not great weapons, and Graveguard can have great weapons or shields either way, and they either get that amazing parry save, or they can have a great weapon and just have a million strength, while also being able to have access to a ton of spells to improve their initiative. So it's like, wow, Graveguard are just incredible, and Tomb Guard are pretty okay. I think they're fine. Like, I think you can definitely play Tomb Guard now. I would love to see that.
Yeah, and we're not going to make this whole video dedicated to it. We've talked about it multiple times, and again, different communities are ruling in different ways. Before they had updated the FAQ to specifically say, nope, if you lose a wound, You can't use your ward or your regen save like going through difficult, dangerous terrain. And they just stealth removed it in the 1.51 update. And so they didn't tell us why they removed it. They gave no notes on it. It's just, whoop, just gone. And so some communities have been rolling it. Well, raw, no, it's silly. We feel that it clearly shouldn't work for crumbling. Other communities like ourselves, we believe they removed it for a purpose, and it is intended. Their intention of removing it is that you can use it for crumbling. Again, this is very controversial in the community. We might be right, we might be wrong. We don't know until GW clarifies this for us. And to Evan's point, it feels pretty decent actually in the Tomb King's army because they don't have nearly as much regen and they don't have nearly as much armor as a Vampire Count's army does. It definitely feels a lot more powerful in the heavy or full plate wearing heavy infantry cavalry of the Vampire Count's army, especially with that regen banner, in particular when you double or triple down with it in a Graveguard unit. So I don't know that it was unintended by might just be an oversight that it is just too powerful in that Graveguard banner combo, which is what's tilting people so much. So maybe we'll find out in the future, maybe the next FAQ drop.
Next thing is that there is the new Arcane Journal, the War of Cetra's Fury, is coming out soon. There's already been rumors or releases of information about this. That there's going to be cavalry characters for the Tomb Princes, the Heralds, like kind of your BSB type guy, and then for the Wizards. And the models look amazing. And apparently they're getting a new version or a reboot of their Skeletal Steed that actually gets to have barding now, which when you're an army that is not allowed to buy heavy armor and you can only ever have light armor and shield or something like that, having a barded horse is going to be pretty important to keeping your armor save up. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super cool, and it's a great model.
And there is also rumors that there's going to be things in there to make your skeletal horsemen suck a lot less, because currently they're a little bit of a joke. And if there's something in there that gives your character the ability to like let the horsemen have countercharge when you join them, something like that, or if there's any way to get a unit of horsemen that have barding. They don't necessarily need lances, but if they could just have barding on their dudes, right? Or have Tomb Guard stats but on a horse, that would be pretty cool. And currently, Tomb Kings don't really have a heavy or even medium cavalry option because that doesn't exist.
Yep, but we're not there. We're talking about the 1.5 update in this one. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens. And I guess it's just right around the corner. So it will be interesting to see how that does impact this army. Hopefully it creates makes some of the existing units a little bit more viable, and hopefully that will unlock new seen yet. So the Tomb King's army from the get-go of this edition has been very strong. It's still very strong. We expect it still to be very strong going forward. Very happy to see that, because if you recall, Evan, back in the 8th edition and before, Tomb Kings really didn't get a lot of love on the rule support. They dropped these beautiful models, and then they were actually, unfortunately, very weak in the meta. So very happy to see that they are very competitive. They're still very competitive right now. And the 1.5 did nerf them in some ways, but it also buffed them as well, and they still feel very competitive on the tournament scene.
Yeah, and like we were mentioning about our most recent RTT, Andrew was on that top table with Tomb Kings. If he had gotten a bit luckier with his rolls, perhaps, he might have been the winner of the last tournament. So you can see that Tomb Kings are definitely performing very well, and I like to see that. It's great to have a bit of a change. I think that the Tomb Kings army is more balanced and well-rounded and less reliant on like a single overpowered unit than some of the other kind of top dogs at the moment.
Yep.
So the next up is Monster Spam, which is something that Andrew definitely plays occasionally, like he was at the last tournament, where what if I just have a crap load of like Necro Sphinxes, for example, that can fly, they've got toughness 6, and if you just don't have that many things that can hurt higher toughness models in there, or they can react quickly to flying monsters, that's going to be a problem for you. And, a lot of people don't have an answer to that. Even if you have a bunch of Night Goblins with their Fanatics, wounding on 5s, sometimes you just get no wounds because you just didn't roll any 5s.
Well, right? Night Goblins just are not reliable. They're incredibly fun, but they're not reliable. And this isn't specific to the Tomb Kings, of course. There are multiple armies that can be, toughness 5, monster spam heavy, but the Tomb Kings are definitely one of the competitive ones with it. And I think the biggest difference is they can also heal them in clutch situations. And they have a lot of strong options, not just a single one, because you can also support them with the Tomb Scorpions and other things as well. Plus, you could do heavy monster spam with really, really good shooting and magic. I think that is specific to Tomb Kings. I don't think you get that trio combo in any other list quite the same. So their monster spam has been and is still very effective.
Yeah, I really wish that that wasn't as much the case. I think that well-rounded armies, for one thing, if you skew into something like monsters, you are just begging to have a very one-sided result with your opponent. You're either going to have an opponent who has no answer to having four Necrosphinxes in their face at the same time, or let's say two and two dragons or something like that. Or you can have an opponent that has a Dragon Slayer sword on a Duke on a Royal Pegasus or something like that, and he could just go around one-shotting all of them. And so when you
Mhm.
take a skew list, you are very likely to have a game that is one-sided either for you or against you, and I think that that's way more boring than just having a balanced list. And it's just good to be aware of that as a player and as a collector, that maybe you don't need to buy four Necrosphinxes or whatever, because even if it's really good today, what if it's not good next edition or after the next patch, right? And then you just have a skew list that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and I think again, Andrew, I think only had three. But that
Yeah.
being said, yes, skew lists in general, that's true. But honestly, that's true for any tabletop game, not necessarily old world specific. Typically, the meta lists often for flashes in the pan are heavy skew list, heavy shooting, heavy melee, heavy speed, whatever it is, until the meta or the community learns to adapt to that and how to handle that situation. As soon as you have one player that's going to just prevent you from ever getting to the podium, people stop taking those lists. But in that flash of the pan moment, for those few months where people are not prepared, you could definitely surprise people and rocket yourself to the podium with a heavy skew list. So that's why that's just a common thing we're just going to see from time to time, all the time. But yes, that absolutely happens. People buy a whole bunch of models of one thing, and the meta where the game makers change the rules. Like, nope, that was really bad for the game, really bad for the community, and you no longer field that many of them, and suddenly you have buyer's remorse. So yeah, I definitely agree with Evan. Never going to encourage chasing the meta. It's a dangerous game to chase the meta. Certainly, I'd focus on what's the army you love, what are the models you love to the table. How are you going to make sure you're going to have a great game and your opponent's going to have a great game too? That's the most important thing.
Right, and remember that when you have a balanced collection, a balanced army list, you have the reverse happen, where you're much less likely to have a 20-0 or an 0-20 type result at a tournament or just against your friends. So if you do not skew into one particular aspect of the game, you will have a more balanced outcome, and a much more commonly you'll get like for them like a draw or only a minor win. And look, if you're trying to chase the dragon of just getting very much like that big overwhelming success, cool, but maybe that's not as fun for your opponent either, right? So sometimes you take those things into consideration. Okay, next one up is Mortuary Cult. Um, yeah, they were definitely really annoying with their plus 11 to cast or whatever they could get, and people thought that was just absolutely insane. And then
So
games hooked
explain to
up.
people what they were doing before. How were they
Yeah.
achieving this ridiculous combo that a lot of us felt was never intended? GW has now formally addressed it. Thank you. But explain to people what was happening.
So in particular, it was annoying when you have a level 4 wizard who's within range of a casket of souls, or for a while, two caskets, and they could just get the +1 from both until they kind of clarified that too, I think. So
Correct.
Cask gives you a +1 for +5. Great. That's already really strong. Even a single +1 on a 2d6 chart increases your chances of beating the other person dramatically. But then you can just be able to drain wounds from a nearby unit and add their number of wounds that you drained to your casting roll. I think it's D3. And so when you were able to drain it from the tomb swarms, which had the 3 wounds each or multiple wounds, you could then get your casting value up to, I think it's level 4 +1 for that, and then +3 for the draining is that's already +8. Then I think there's a way to get another one. So it was up to +9. And that means that if you roll a 1 and a 2 on the dice, and you roll a 3 on the dice, you get any spell off in the game pretty much. And the other person has a very hard time dispelling it, because just that flat bonus of +9 or whatever was enough to make it so that you just force all of your spells through. Because you could just keep doing that, and guess what? The next turn, or immediately after that, depending on the order of operations, you could just heal those tomb swarms anyway. So you could just
Yep.
regain all the wounds back on the thing you just used to cast with and just do it again.
Yep, and this wasn't people cheating. Wasn't people anything do anything wrong. These were the rules that they put into that first Arcane Journal with the Mortuary Cult. And oops, they didn't think that one through or test it thoroughly enough and such. So I'm very glad to see that they have addressed it. Thank you. Would it have been nice if they addressed it sooner? Sure, but it is addressed now, which is great. So it feels like again they're at a much more healthy place where you get the +1 from the casket. There's no double tripling down on casket. baskets, and then you could use your Mortuary Cult ability to give you another +1, so you could still get a +2. +2 is still very powerful. In particular, it feels almost for free with it because it's part of that list from, you're not having to sacrifice very much at all in order to get that off. So it's still very, very strong.
Yeah, and I think that means your level 4 has the +4 in total, and your level 2s have +3 in total, which is better than pretty much everybody else, because most factions do not have an item that just gives them +1 to cast all the time, or +1 to cast from a certain condition. Most people don't have that, so they have to just raw dog it, and they don't have that ability. And all of those pluses to cast also mean minuses to enemy being able to stop you with their dispel. So still pretty good, but the real change is that basically the Wild Herd rules is now just better than Mortuary Cult, because all of their downsides got kind of removed, and Mortuary Cult now is just a kind of a little bit less scary compared to the Wild Herd, which is able to kind of do almost what Mortuary Cult used to be able to do. So very, very much a change in the meta there. I think that Mortuary Cult is still very viable. I think, was Andrew playing Mortuary Cult? I believe he was. In particular because you don't really have to take that. Yeah, you don't have to take the Tomb King, and you get to have more of the, some of the best units in their army roster are like the Ushabti and the Necrosphinx and the Tomb Scorpions, and the Mortuary Cult's like, yeah, just play more of those. So very, very good. Okay, next up is Enchantment Spells. So I've been writing on this for a long time that, the old days of magic missiles and hexes trying to cast on people are potentially gone, because a lot of people are bringing more magic resistance or having, ways to stop casting. Like I've been bringing Drain Magic, the spell, which means it's you have to get a higher casting value to get your spell off in the first place if you're within range of the person who has Drain Magic. So what can you do in this kind of meta is focus on enchantment spells instead. Cast on your own units. You don't have magic resistance stopping you, and then that 55-60% chance or whatever of rolling high enough, or maybe even better if you have Mortuary Cult, not so bad anymore. And now you can actually really bank on the fact that, hey, maybe I'll have a Skeleton Brick, and I'm not going to be able to use Plague of Rust or Miasma Mirage as often as I was before. But now that Skeleton Brick can have Earthen Ramparts basically all day long, because I can just keep casting it over and over. They're not going to be able to stop my pretty high rolls. And with that many bonuses, the enchantment could still go off, even if it is a 9+, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's still very, very good, and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got Jajap's Cursed Blades and several other kind of Tomb King's oriented spells. Glittering Robe is another good one to have in your big units. And then suddenly these Tomb Kings are like, wow, they're not going anywhere. And again, as soon as you give anything a ward save, that's the third save, because they have regen and they usually have at least some kind of armor. So pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I didn't put it on here, but wow, you can just have your skeleton spearmen or hand weapon and shield skeletons they can buy the light armor, and then they can just have a 4+ armor save. That's pretty good, because they're so cheap. You just have a crap load of those dudes.
Yeah, it's very, very good, and I think the interesting thing is there's more resilience inherently now, or more options and such. So I think Tomb Kings are interesting that they took some of the nerfs to some of the, let's face it, some outliers that I don't believe the rules writer thought some of those things through, or understood the combos that were being unleashed. And so it feels like they just addressed some of the bigger challenges. So what did they really get from the 1.5? They really got some, besides they got some balance passes, certainly, that is very fair. But I'm hoping that this is going to encourage Tomb King players to look at new combos, new things in their lists they hadn't considered before. And before, we really never saw the Tomb Guard on the table. I absolutely think Tomb Guard are a royal or valid choice, and we can see them more often as that anvil unit. I think in particular, I think we're going to see less of the monster skew going forward, as there's definitely going to be more shooting in the meta than there was before, because magic is not nearly as dominant. Magic is still very powerful, as dominant. So now players are going to be more likely to take those cannons, those rifles, those war machines, certainly Cathay on the board. Those large monsters are going to be much easier to take down with a huge volley of massed firepower. And suddenly you're going to say, hey, I don't have the durability. I need to start looking at my infantry books again. Now, we haven't quite seen that happen yet. I'm curious over the upcoming months if we're going to start seeing that shift.
Okay, and then next up is, I'm personally going to put my stake down, and I think the Tomb Kings are the best anti-Cathay army in the game. So if you're like, oh my god, those Cathay people are driving me nuts with all their lanterns, well, this might be the army for you. Because first of all, you can just regen a lot of that damage, that high spike damage that they can do to you. You have less worries about fleeing or panicking off the table because obviously you don't care about any of that when you get shot at by those templates, things like that nature. Any of their like ambushing or terror causing stuff won't really matter for you either. And then you've got Ushabti with great bows, which provide an incredibly cheap firing platform to just try to plink wounds off of these large target lanterns that can't really hide from you. And you have really long range that you can reach with that. You've got the Casket
high
of
strength,
Souls.
multiple wound. They're really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, you've got Casket of Souls with its magic missile or light of protection. Either way, just being able to shut down. Dragonfire bombs are heinous and crazy because they can march towards you and then be within short range and just hit on like 3+ with most of their attacks. And then every hit is like D3. But if you can just give a couple minuses to hit with, either, for example, the dragon already has a -1 to hit against shooting. It never really mattered because people didn't really shoot at it, but it already has that. And then you've got the casket can do another -1 to that or to your units of infantry, for example, to protect them. So that's very, very good. The Casket of Souls is unironically just one of the most useful pieces in the game. After the Herdstone, that's like almost auto take, right? Yeah, and then you've got Necrosphinxes with Terror, and you have access to Necromancy Magic, which I think that both of those two things combined are pretty good versus Cathay to lower their leadership, make them fail their terror checks. The lanterns are not immune to psychology, so they can fail a terror check and then have to just flee and run off the board. So there's definitely some cool stuff you could do there. I think that combine that. Oh, even the catapults. I think catapults can do some damage on a really big base if you just get a central
They
hit.
absolutely can. I really want to point that out. This isn't specific to Tomb Kings, but the catapults or mortars or any of the things that are using that indirect fire, or whether they're firing directly, they have line of sight or not. Those lanterns are on a huge base, and you only need the little hole to actually hit that base to get a direct hit with the higher strength with the multiple wounds. I believe we're going to see way more of those catapult type war machines hit the table because they are excellent at taking down balloons. As long as you don't roll a misfire, they are actually very accurate. And so I really encourage people to reevaluate putting those in their army roster, whether Tomb Kings or others. The Tomb King one is also just great too because it also causes fear, and it's just a great war machine. And it looks really cool.
And then when it lands, and if you have Skulls of the Foe, it gives them either lower leadership or a panic check or both. So Skulls of the Foe can also have a way to affect your opponent even when you miss with your catapult, which is cool. So yeah, if you combine all this stuff together, I think that you have potentially the best Anti-Cathay army out there because they can kind of not care as much about their attacks and they can do really well against them. And I don't think Cathay does super well in a long grind against just a million skeletons or Ushabti or whatever in combat. So even if those Lancers make it into the Ushabti or the Bowshabti, I don't know if they're going to win because the Ushabti's got relatively high number of attacks each, still like Strength 4, Toughness 4. So I think that the Lancers with their only Strength 4 lances might actually just lose that matchup. So next up, we're going to talk about Mortuary Cult. We've already been talking about the worse casting updates and stuff like that, but I think there's still a very, very good list. Andrew had a list with 3 Necrosphinxes in it. You can have a lot of Tomb Scorpions in there. Just bringing all of the very much good units. You know what else is interesting is that I think Andrew and obviously the Garrett did not use 1,000 points of their character allowance, and I am curious to see whether this trend continues because of perhaps the changes to the challenge rules or to like the monster mount survivability that maybe people are not choosing not to bring 1,000 points of characters unless if you're an elf. Which I don't know if that's going to change. And that would be really cool if it's not just optimal to say, hey, I could either have a unit of dudes or I could just have a regular level 2 wizard on foot and he's better than the whole unit of dudes, right? And then hopefully that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that shift absolutely. The difference of the character rules, the difference of the magic rules. Like before, you were really, really incentivized to double, triple down on your Death Star characters. Spend as many points as possible on this melee character that's unkillable, unbeatable points as possible as this wizard because it's going to dominate the battlefield. But now with all the changes of the 1.5, that's no longer the case. You are far more incentivized to spread things out, or you're capped and you're no longer able to put that many points in that melee character, or the challenge rule is going to just make the viable charged targets on the battlefield just less, or you have to spend more time dancing around them. And now you have to really start thinking to yourself, well, yeah, my 500 point character on that dragon or 550 point or 600 point character before was easily making up his points in the game before, or easily taking down the biggest threat that my enemy had before. But now hey, that big giant elite enemy unit, it's not taking that down anymore. It is way more durable than it ever was before. Or I don't want to go into that grind for multiple turns. Or how many are you really making your versus? I might benefit from another war machine, or I might be better off with taking another heavy cavalry. Better off with another ambusher or something else. And I think we're going to see a lot more of players really thinking twice about these things. And I encourage you to look at your list when you're not just maxing out your character points allotment. I really do not believe that that is the best, most competitive meta list that is out there. I think players are still searching for it, and I think we're going to see more competitive meta lists where you're not maxing out your character points.
Okay, and then last up here, so as far as the Royal Host goes, it used to be kind of terrible because only level 1 or 2 wizards, right? And usually this just meant, oh, if the other person brought Illusion or Pillar of Fire, you were just going to lose that game. And it was like, great. So that was just terrible. But now it's like, okay, maybe level 1 wizard, fine, whatever. You just cast one spell and then just yeet yourself into the enemy and buy some magic resistance. That's fine. And so that's really cool. I think that a fully aggressive like force led by Cetra is not that far off from being very good. So I think you could definitely do that.
Yeah, and Cetra's really, really cool.
Yeah.
All right, any last thoughts on the Tomb Kings with 1.51, sir?
Just that everyone out there can stay legendary, and if you want to join in on the discussion, you can join our Discord. We've got a link in the description.
All right, we'll see you next time.